So once you open Excel and possibly get past the workshop gallery, the workbook gallery, this is what you'll see. So we're going to look at some of the different parts of the Excel interface. So up at the very top here, you can see we have what's called the menu bar, and it has things that are very typical. You've seen them in Word or in other programs. So under File, we have the ability to create a new workbook, which is what Excel calls a file. We can open files, we can open recent, we can save, we can import, etc. Edit, we have some cutting and copying and the sorts of things, again, that you've seen in Word, pasting. View, we can change the look of the interface, so we could hide or show certain elements of the interface. We have insert, which shows you a bunch of different options. So this is something you can explore. You certainly don't need to memorize it. You will typically use probably view and file most frequently. The next aspect of the interface is called the standard toolbar, and that's what we see up here. And it has a bunch of buttons that control some fairly common functions. So this button would give us a new workbook. This would create a new one from a template. In other words, if you had a particular kind of workbook you wanted to create that is a standard one, then Excel might already have some formats for those. We have opening a workbook, saving a workbook, printing, etc. And we'll come back to all of these. There's a couple of these, though, that I did want to draw attention to. So again, cut, copy, these are fairly typical. Over here, we have some that are a little more specific to Excel. So when you have a certain group of cells selected, if you click on this button, it will sum the values in those cells, and that can be very useful. So again, I would recommend just looking at this a little bit and trying to get a feel for what's up here. The next thing that we have is called the ribbon. And it has this menu up here, and it allows us, when we click on these, to change what shows up down here, which is the ribbon. And this is where Excel puts a lot of more sort of detailed features. Commonly, you will be in Home, where you'll see a bunch of things relating to formatting. So if you want to change the font type or the font size, if you want to use subscripts or superscripts, if you want to change the font size, bold, etc., that's all here. And it's also where you would decide, for example, if you wanted text to wrap around rather than just continue on the same horizontal line, that would be here. When we get to graphs, you'll see that we'll be clicking on the graphs tab, and that will allow us to pull up a menu of all kinds of graphs. So again, this is not something, you don't need to memorize all these, but you just basically need to know where things are. Down here on this line, we have two important elements of the interface. The first one here shows you the active cell. So for example, right now, cell A1 is active. If I click over here, I'm now in cell F8, which is to say I'm in column F, row 8, and it tells me here that that's the active cell. This right here tells us the content of that cell. So for example, if I type in the number 9 here, and I click here, I can see that I have the content 9. If I type in, let's say, a word, I'll type that specifically, now it tells me shows me there. This is particularly useful when we start to use formulas, because I might have a formula that says take whatever the value is in cell F8, E8, multiply it by 2 and put the value here in cell F8. Well, F8 would show me the actual number, but up here I would see the underlying formula. And again, we'll start to see that in more detail. Down here we have what's called the worksheet, and that's where you're going to be typing all your text, your numbers, your formulas, and that's basically where you do the work that Excel does for you. You can have multiple worksheets in the same workbook. Again, workbook is the file name for Excel. Worksheet is just a particular sheet, and as I said, you can have multiple ones. So for example, this one is currently called sheet 1. If I click down here, I'll add a second sheet. And so I can go back and forth between these two sheets, and I could have, let's say different years of the same company's sales and revenues. I could have one that was in sheet one that was in sheet two. I could link those sheets, although that's more advanced. So that's the basic layout. You can also rename these sheets if you so desire. That is the Excel interface. You don't need to memorize all this, but what you need to do is just have a general familiarity of where to look.